This is the panel on witness and its relevance for today. And that's kind of a larger than you might think question, because this work is clearly a classic in my mind and that of many others. And the test of a classic is whether it remains relevant with the changing times and changing cultures. If it can do that, then it can fight its way continually in the world of great books. And certainly this has all of the elements of it, many of them really quite strange and almost mythological. The strange matter of Lionel Trilling writing the middle of the journey before Witness comes out, a book about Whittaker Chambers, in which literary critics find the Alger Hiss character, but Trilling never heard of Alger Hiss. Strange kind of prefiguration there. And then the images, driving all night to hide documents in a pumpkin on his farm. The old Woodstock typewriter and the typeface that told the story. The prothonotary warbler that Richard Nixon used to trap Hiss in his cross-examination. And these things, they live in a kind of mythological memory. It was in the New York Times about 3 weeks ago or so, in a little box, A11 or something. A prothonotary warbler had appeared in New York City, in Manhattan. And the Times had photographed it, and they made the reference to the work we're going to talk about today. And then I think a classic status was enhanced by the seemingly never-ending decades of controversy in which the defenders of Alger Hiss tried to make their slanders of the author of Witness stick. Today I want to introduce three panelists, and this is an amazingly powerful group we have here. All at once, and then leave it to them. They'll take it over, each, I hope, making their remarks about 10 minutes, and then we'll open it for further discussion. Elliot Abrams has had a remarkable string of positions of enormous importance. I know him going back the early Reagan years. He began, in my knowledge, with human rights. That was really something intellectually to come in behind the Jimmy Carter kind of invention of human rights in the State Department through Pat Darien. In charge of Latin American affairs, and then positions in the White House. In every case, he really always brought a deeply moral and intellectual realm into the work that he was doing in practice and in policy. And now he is the truth teller in an entirely new career, it seems to me, on an issue, the Middle East and the Arab-Israeli problem, telling the truth where the truth is very rarely to be found or not twisted. And I must say, speaking of classics, I just want to give a plug to, I think the first book he did, maybe not the first, but called Undue Process, which is a classic of Washington. I think no one should go to Washington without reading that book. Max Boot, in this time when the laws of war and the strange asymmetries of warfare, the principles of strategy seem to be overwhelmed or out of date. He has become the authoritative voice on military affairs, always with amazing, consistent, unquestioned integrity, which is also a kind of a rarity in a field which is marked often by politicization and score settling. And his Invisible Armies looks like being a major work. I haven't seen that yet. We're looking forward to that. Jay Nordlinger, who I just met a moment ago. I think we all here realize that serious thought on international affairs requires the widest range of reference, that you can't just focus on one corner of the strategic realm. And when you see his name in the author's line, you know that you're about to get something with tremendous explanatory power and with writings that go across into the culture of the country and the arts, beyond the usual Washingtoniana. And also he deserves great praise for finally calling to account that annual fraud, the Nobel Peace Prize. After his book, They Call It Peace, no one can ever say Nobel Peace Prize again without saying so ironically. Mm-hmm. So I'll turn it over to them, and I think we'll start with Elliot, if that's okay.
Thank you, Charlie. We first met when I was a very young, callow assistant secretary trying to figure out how to get around the Department of State. And I got guidance into the true secrets of how the department works from Charlie, who was then the top assistant to Secretary Schultz. Those secrets remain buried. We're not going to talk about that. Don't worry. I have a few points to make and a couple of questions to raise about the ways in which witness, and one might say more generally, anti-communism are irrelevant today. First, the place where witness, I think, clearly is relevant, and that's when we deal with the great communist power of the day, China. Chambers, this is a passage I like. Chambers wrote, "What I had been fell from me like dirty rags. The rags that fell from me were not only communism. What fell was the whole web of the materialist modern mind, the luminous shroud which it has spun about the spirit of man, paralyzing in the name of rationalism the instinct of his soul for God, denying in the name of knowledge the reality of the soul and its birthright in that mystery on which mere knowledge falters and shatters at every step." Close quote. We now watch the soulless Chinese Communist Party battle Chinese Christians, Chinese Buddhists, and believe that if they can only offer a few more apartments or better factory jobs in port cities, that will provide the answer to the Chinese people's yearnings for freedom. Everything that, in that sense, that Chambers wrote about communism and its failures is quite applicable, I think. The tougher question, or a tougher question, is the relevance of what he wrote to our struggle today with Islamism. Here, the other side relies on faith, and our side, especially in Europe, seems to rely on materialism. This was a struggle of the human soul, Chambers wrote, but we often seem to believe that the answer to Islamism is simply, more employment opportunities for Saudi youth. We're, in a sense, in the position that we criticize the Chinese leadership for having. But even here on the Islamic question, Chambers had some interesting things to say. He wrote that, quote, "The difference between liberalism and communism was in degree only." This question arose in the previous panel. Continuing, "Both put their faith in man and rejected faith in God. Therefore, they shared a common worldview." There is a lesson here, I think. Chambers held that we could not fight communism best with its near relation, liberalism. Were he alive, I think he would say we cannot fight violent Islamist extremism with an ideology that is different from it in degree only and shares a common worldview with it, namely nonviolent Islamist extremism. If that seems obvious to you, it has not been obvious to many governments around the world. For example, the government of the United Kingdom, which spent about a decade financing and promoting what it saw as nonviolent Islamist extremist groups under the theory that only they could talk to and dissuade the violent extremists, only to conclude in the end, really about the end of the Blair period, that the shared worldview was disastrous, and that obviously they should be backing anti-extremists, individuals, and arguments. A Chambers story, as has been said, is not only the story of the loss of faith, but of the acceptance of faith, Christianity. In the current Islamic case, the analogy is not perfect, but there is an analogy. After all, Chambers was born into a faith and culture of Christianity in and around New York in the first decade of the 20th century. He did not, in the end, adopt some foreign religion. He adopted his own religion, that of his ancestors. Similarly, we don't have to seek to have Islamists convert to what is to them a foreign religion, but rather to reclaim the Islam of their own ancestors, one unpoisoned by the extremism we associate with Wahhabism and Al-Qaeda. The problem for us is that communism and Christianity were very much part of Western culture and something that we were knowledgeable about and suited to fight over. Islam is different. It's hard for us and for our own government to be effective in the struggle within that religion. I just want to also note, by the way, because Charlie mentioned a novel, Middle of the Journey. Witness was one of the greatest autobiographical works about breaking with extremism. I guess we'd say Darkness at Noon was perhaps one of the greatest novel about it. And they had great political impact in part because they were great literary works of art. There are some Islamic works about breaking with extremism. The Islamist by Ed Hussein, Radical by Majid Nawaz. But I don't think, I don't read Arabic, but I don't think there are any such works that are great works of art seen from the point of view of literature. I believe we still await such a work. Two brief final points. Witness was written partly to awaken us to the domestic threat that we face, something that the Hiss case obviously demonstrated. So one question is that lesson still relevant? The threat of terrorism from Al-Qaeda or Hezbollah may be grave, but it comes from foreigners, not misguided Americans. Or does it? Should we be more concerned about the attraction of such extremist views to American citizens? Finally, the old issue, which also came up in the last panel, Chambers' pessimism. He thought he had joined the losing side, famously. Would he think that today? He wrote that in this century, within the next decades, will be decided for generations whether all mankind is to become communist, whether the whole world is to become free, or whether in the struggle civilization as we know it is to be completely destroyed or completely changed. The collapse of the Soviet Union meant that the future of communism is decided. I think, however long it takes, it will collapse in China too, I believe. Yet, his tragic sense of life would have kept him from being Pollyannish about Western civilization. Human societies, like human beings, live by faith and die when faith dies, he wrote. Certainly in Europe, he would see that faith dying. Similarly, he would have watched faith, in that case in communism, die in the USSR, and we are seeing faith in communism die in China. Would he see faith dying slowly now in our own country, while yet it burns so brightly in so much of the Muslim world? Or would he see the extraordinary expansion of Christianity in Africa and Latin America and China, or of evangelicalism in our own country as a sign today of new hope? I leave you that for the discussion period. Thank you.